the Copacabana nightclub, 1952. The air was thick with cigar smoke and the intoxicating rhythm of Cuban music. But on this particular night, something was about to happen that would leave everyone in that legendary venue absolutely speechless. Desi Arnaz, the Cuban sensation who had conquered American television alongside his wife Lucille Ball, was backstage preparing for his performance. He was adjusting his cufflinks when a shadow fell across the dressing room door. Standing there was Carlos El Tiburón Mendez, a name that sent shivers down the spine of every Cuban in New York. The shark of Havana had come calling. But to understand what happened next, we need to go back to where it all began. Desiderio Alberto Arnaz y de Acha III was born into Cuban aristocracy. His father was the mayor of Santiago de Cuba, his grandfather a founding executive of Bacardi rum. Young Desi lived in a world of marble floors, crystal chandeliers, and servants who attended to his every need. But revolution has a way of turning paradise into purgatory. When Batista's coup shattered their world in 1933, the Arnaz family lost everything. Overnight, they went from nobility to nobodies. 16-year-old Desi found himself in Miami with nothing but the clothes on his back and a burning determination to rebuild what was lost. He cleaned birdcages for money. The boy who once had servants now served others. But Desi had something that couldn't be taken away, his music. The rhythms of Cuba flowed through his veins like liquid fire. He formed a band, introducing American audiences to the conga line, a dance that would sweep the nation. By 1940, he was performing on Broadway. By 1951, he was the co-star and producer of television's biggest show, I Love Lucy. Yet success in America didn't mean he'd left his past behind. The Cuban exile community was tight-knit, and within it operated men like Carlos Mendez, men who had their fingers in everything from nightclubs to numbers games. They expected loyalty from their countrymen, especially the successful ones. Which brings us back to that night at the Copa. Mendez walked into Desi's dressing room uninvited, his two bodyguards flanking him like dark angels. He didn't waste time with pleasantries. But who was Carlos El Tiburón Mendez? To understand the weight of this moment, you need to know his reputation. In pre-revolution Cuba, Mendez had been an enforcer for the casinos, a man who collected debts in blood when pesos wouldn't suffice. When he arrived in New York in 1948, he brought with him the violent methods of old Havana. By 1952, he controlled numbers running in Spanish Harlem and had a piece of every Cuban-owned business from the Bronx to Brooklyn. They called him the Shark because once he smelled blood in the water, he never let go. His victims included Francisco Valdez, a restaurant owner who refused to pay protection money and found his establishment burned to the ground. Miguel Santos, a bandleader who crossed him, disappeared for 3 days and returned with fingers too broken to ever play guitar again. When Mendez set his sights on someone, they usually paid or prayed, sometimes both. And now, he stood in Desi Arnaz's dressing room at the most prestigious nightclub in New York. Arnaz, he said in Spanish, his voice like gravel, you've done well for yourself. Time to remember where you came from. Desi's hands never stopped adjusting his bow tie, but those who knew him could see the steel forming in his eyes. This wasn't the first time someone had tried to muscle him. It wouldn't be the last. I never forget where I came from, Carlos, Desi replied, also in Spanish. Every beat of my drums reminds me. Mendez smiled, the kind of smile that never reached his eyes. Good. Then you'll understand why we need your cooperation. A percentage of your earnings. Call it a cultural tax. The room fell silent. Even the distant music from the main floor seemed to fade. Desi's makeup artist had frozen mid-powder, his assistant barely dared to breathe. Everyone knew what Mendez was capable of. Stories of his brutality were legend in certain circles. But they didn't know Desi Arnaz. What happened next became the stuff of nightclub legend. Desi turned slowly, facing Mendez directly. When he spoke, his voice carried the authority of a man who had rebuilt his life from ashes. Let me tell you something about cultural taxes, Desi began, switching to English so everyone in the room could understand. My family paid them already. We paid with our home, our fortune, our country. I came here with nothing and built something from that nothing. Not with guns or threats, but with these. He held up his hands, the hands that had cleaned cages, that had pounded conga drums until they bled, that had signed production deals that revolutionized television. You want to talk about being Cuban? Being Cuban isn't about taking from your own people. It's about lifting them up. Every success I have opens doors for others like us. Every time America sees me on that screen, they see that we're not just refugees or troublemakers. We're artists, businessmen, Americans. Mendez's hand moved slightly toward his jacket, a gesture everyone in that room understood. But Desi wasn't finished. You think you're strong because you have those men behind you. I have 40 million Americans who invite me into their homes every Monday night. I have the New York Police Commissioner's personal phone number. I have lunch with senators. But more than that. Desi stepped closer to Mendez, close enough that the gangster could smell his cologne, a custom blend from Havana, one of the few things he still imported from the old country. I have something you'll never have, Carlos. I have the respect of my people, not their fear, their respect. When Cuban mothers point me out to their children, they say, you can be like him. What do they say when they see you? The silence that followed was deafening. Mendez's jaw worked, muscles tensing and releasing. His men shifted nervously, unsure what their boss would do. Violence in the Copacabana would bring heat nobody wanted, but backing down would show weakness. Then something unexpected happened. From the main floor, the band began playing Babalu, Desi's signature song. The sound drifted into the dressing room like a ghost from the past. Mendez's expression changed almost imperceptibly. You remember this song, don't you, Carlos? Desi said softly. We're not so different, you and I. We both lost our country. We both had to fight to survive here. The difference is how we chose to fight. For a long moment, the two men stared at each other, two different versions of the Cuban-American dream, one built on fear, the other on laughter. Finally, Mendez spoke. You have brass ones, Arnaz. I'll give you that. He straightened his jacket, a gesture that made his men relax slightly. Perhaps I was hasty. A man who speaks to power like that, maybe he's worth more as an ally than an enemy. I'm nobody's enemy, Desi replied. But I'm nobody's victim either. Mendez nodded slowly, then did something that shocked everyone present. He extended his hand. After a heartbeat's hesitation, Desi shook it. Enjoy your show, Mr. Television Star, Mendez said, turning to leave. At the door, he paused. That bit about respect, maybe you have a point. Maybe. And with that, he was gone, leaving behind only the lingering scent of Cuban cigars and a room full of people who couldn't quite believe what they'd just witnessed. 15 minutes later, Desi took the stage. Those who were there that night swear they'd never seen him perform with such passion. He attacked the conga drums like a man possessed, sweat flying with each strike, his voice carrying an edge that transformed familiar songs into declarations of independence. When he performed Babalu, the signature song that had made him famous, he sang it not as entertainment but as an anthem, a prayer to the Santeria gods of his homeland for strength in a foreign land. The audience, unaware of the drama that had unfolded backstage, felt something electric in the air. Celebrities and socialites who usually chatted through performances fell silent. Walter Winchell, the powerful gossip columnist, later wrote, Desi Arnaz didn't just perform at the Copa last night, he waged war with rhythm and won. But the real victory came in what happened next. Within hours, word of the confrontation spread through the nightclub circuit like wildfire. By dawn, every Cuban musician from the Palladium to the Latin Quarter knew that Desi Arnaz had stood up to El Tiburón and lived to tell about it. The story grew in the telling, as such stories do. In some versions, Desi had physically thrown Mendez out. In others, he'd threatened to expose the gangster's operations to J. Edgar Hoover personally. But those who were actually in the room knew the truth was more powerful than any embellishment. Desi had won with words, with dignity, with an unshakable conviction that success earned honestly was worth more than safety bought with fear. The ripple effects were immediate and far-reaching. Tony Martinez, a Cuban pianist who'd been paying Mendez protection for months, suddenly found the courage to refuse. If Desi can stand up to him, so can I, he declared. Within a week, half a dozen other Cuban performers had followed suit. Mendez, surprisingly, didn't retaliate. Some whispered he'd been impressed by Desi's courage. Others suggested that the attention the confrontation had drawn made further action too risky. But Roberto Mendez, Carlos's own nephew, later revealed the truth. Uncle Carlos saw himself in Arnaz that night. The man he could have been if he'd chosen different. It haunted him. The confrontation also had an unexpected effect on Desi's career. Word reached the highest echelons of CBS, where executives had been nervous about their biggest stars' Cuban connections. William Paley, the network's legendary chief, personally called Desi the next day. I heard you had some trouble last night, Paley said carefully. No trouble, Bill, Desi replied. Just a conversation about American values. You know, life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness without some hood taking a cut. Paley's laugh was relieved. That's my boy. Listen, Desi, we've been thinking about expanding your production deal. Within a month, Desilu Productions had secured funding for 3 new shows. The message was clear: Desi Arnaz wasn't just talent to be protected, he was a force to be reckoned with. But there's another layer to this story, one that involves the woman who stood beside Desi through triumphs and troubles alike. Lucille Ball wasn't at the Copa that night, but she felt the tremors of what had happened. "I knew something was different when he came home," Lucy would later tell close friends. Desi had faced racism, discrimination, doubters, but this was different. He walked taller that night, like he'd finally proven something to himself. What most people didn't know was that Lucy had her own encounters with those who tried to exploit Desi's success. Phone calls in the middle of the night, veiled threats about protecting their investment in I Love Lucy. She never told Desi about most of them. The queen of comedy had her own ways of dealing with problems. "I had the studio hire extra security," Lucy revealed years later. "Not for the set, for the accountants. Every penny was tracked, every contract scrutinized. They wanted to get to Desi through the money, they'd have to go through me first." This was the Lucy Ball the public rarely saw, the shrewd businesswoman who, alongside Desi, was building Desilu Productions into a powerhouse. While Desi revolutionized the technical aspects of television production, inventing the multi-camera setup still used today, pioneering the rerun system that would generate millions, Lucy protected their empire with a combination of Midwestern steel and Hollywood savvy. The morning after the Copa confrontation, Lucy found Desi in their living room, staring at an old photograph from Cuba. It showed the Arnaz family estate, the one lost to revolution. "You could have paid him off," she said quietly, settling beside him. "It would have been easier." Desi's laugh was bitter. "Easy? Nothing about being Cuban in America is easy, redhead. But paying men like Mendez, that's not winning. That's just losing slowly." Lucy understood. She'd fought her own battles to be taken seriously in Hollywood, a woman who dared to be funny instead of just beautiful, who demanded creative control when actresses were supposed to be grateful for any role. Together, they were rewriting the rules. "Besides," Desi added, his mood lightening, "you think I work this hard so some two-bit hood can take what's ours? Lucy, we're building something here. Not just a show, a future. For little Desi, for Lucy when she comes along. For every kid who comes here with nothing but dreams." He was right, of course. Desilu Productions would go on to produce not just I Love Lucy, but Star Trek, Mission Impossible, The Untouchables. They were creating the future of television, one revolutionary decision at a time. But success came with a price. The pressure of running a studio, of being TV's favorite couple, while their real marriage crumbled under the weight of Desi's drinking and infidelities, of maintaining the perfect image while fighting private battles, it all took its toll. Years later, when Desi was battling his own demons, the alcohol that would eventually contribute to his downfall, he received an unexpected visitor at his home. Carlos Mendez, older now, grayer, but still carrying himself with that particular swagger of a man who'd lived by his own rules. "I came to America the wrong way," Mendez told him. "You showed me there was another path. Too late for me, maybe, but not for my children. My son just graduated from law school, Columbia. He wants to be a prosecutor." The old gangster smiled ruefully. Imagine that. They shared a drink, just one. Desi was trying to cut back, and talked about the old country, about the music that still played in their hearts, about the dreams that had carried them across the water to a land that challenged them to become either their best or worst selves. When Lucy found them later, two old Cubans sitting in comfortable silence, she asked who Desi's friend was. "Just someone who needed directions," Desi told her. "I think he finally found his way." The confrontation at the Copacabana became a turning point, not just for Desi, but for an entire generation of Cuban-Americans trying to find their place in a new world. It proved that there was more than one way to be strong, more than one way to honor your heritage. Desi Arnaz never forgot where he came from. He carried Cuba in his heart, in his music, in the very rhythm of his speech. But he also understood that the greatest tribute he could pay to his homeland was to succeed with dignity, to show that Cubans could contribute to American culture without compromising their identity or their integrity. Every Monday night, when millions tuned in to watch I Love Lucy, they weren't just watching a comedy show. They were watching a Cuban refugee who had refused to be defined by his losses, who had faced down threats both legal and illegal, who had chosen laughter over violence, creation over destruction. The boy who had cleaned bird cages became the man who made America dance to a Cuban beat. The exile who had lost everything became the producer who revolutionized television. And the entertainer who stood up to a gangster became a symbol of what was possible when courage met opportunity. That night at the Copacabana, Desi Arnaz didn't just save himself from a shakedown. He rewrote the rules of what it meant to be a successful immigrant in America. He showed that you could honor your past without being imprisoned by it, that you could be proud of where you came from while embracing where you were going. Years after both men had passed, Mendez's son, by then a respected federal judge, would keep a photo in his chambers, Desi Arnaz in his prime, conga drum in hand, leading a line of Americans in a dance that had crossed oceans and cultures to bring joy to millions. It was a reminder that sometimes the greatest revolutions aren't fought with guns or threats, but with music, laughter, and the unshakable belief that tomorrow can be better than yesterday. That's the legacy of that night at the Copa, when a Cuban entertainer faced down a Cuban gangster and chose to fight with dignity instead of violence, with success instead of submission. It was a choice that echoed through generations, proving that in America, you really could rewrite your story, one courageous stand at a time.